Genetically modified foods provide many medicinal and technological advances for society. Although it's such a recent field in biotechnology, it has already expanded into a global industry worth $11 billion. Today, 85% of the corn grown in the U.S. is genetically modified, and it is estimated that about 60 to 70% of processed foods in your grocery store include genetically modified ingredients. Since it's so recent, controversy arises over its health issues. It's important to inform the public because, number one, a large number of the U.S. population is already eating it, number two, there's weak government regulation, and number three, there's not enough research on its long-term health effects. Therefore, we should have the right to know whether or not the foods we are buying are genetically modified.
Genetic engineering is when genes are isolated from one species to be transplanted into another. Genetically engineered foods are so recent, they were only introduced into the market in 1996. The purpose of genetically modified foods, or GM foods, are to increase the nutritional content, make them more flavorful, reduce the use of pesticides, speed the growth of plants and animals, and the potential for vaccines and other medicinal applications.
Since GM foods were introduced very recently for human consumption, long-term effects are still unknown. Food safety experts have only been able to identify potential problems associated with it. However, clinical studies have been conducted to test the effects of GM crops on animals. In one short-term study, male and female rats were fed GM plants for less than 1 month to test the toxicology of the GM plants on their reproduction. Results showed that there were no adverse or negative effects. But in another study, rats that were fed flavor-savored GM tomatoes were reported to have stomach erosion and necrosis. Yet, in another study of the effects of RBGH, which is a growth hormone injected into cattle to increase milk yield, cows were observed to have adverse effects, including mastitis, lameness, and decrease in birth rates. In addition, human consumption of milk from cows injected with RBGH may indirectly lead to increased rates of colon, breast, and prostate cancer.
Should we be doing this? What are the ethical issues associated with genetically modified foods? People argue about the healthiness of GM foods. Critics say that such foods may be less nutritious and even harmful to children, who are more susceptible to allergenic reactions, but studies have not shown any major problems as of yet. Another health concern people have involves pesticides. Crops can be modified to develop natural resistances to insects and parasites, reducing the need for pesticides. However, this increase in toxic materials in plants has the potential for weeds to obtain such resistances. Crop growers follow practices to greatly reduce the risk of cross-contamination and the cross-pollination of weeds. Lastly, there is the issue with consumer awareness. A large amount of crops, especially corn, are genetically modified and are not labeled as such. Consumers that are unwilling to buy GM foods have little information and no choice at the supermarket.
Currently, no single statute and no single federal agency govern the regulation of genetically modified foods or animals. Regulation of biotechnology currently fall primarily under the jurisdiction of 3 regulatory agencies, including the FDA, USDA, and EPA. The policies and laws that guide these agencies' oversight of GM foods were originally designed to regulate other products and were put in place before genetically modified products were developed. Therefore, with more consumer awareness and research into genetically modified foods, we can create more specific laws and regulations.
Here's what I'll do as president. I'll immediately implement country of origin labeling because Americans should know where their food comes from. We'll let folks know whether their food has been genetically modified because Americans should know what they're buying.